So thank you for joining us this evening for our Artist and Inspiration program. I'm Cheryl Bronstein. I'm the Director of Interpretation at the Adirondack Experience. And I would like to start this evening's program by acknowledging that the Adirondack Experience is situated on the Aboriginal territories of the Mohawk and Abenaki communities. Indigenous people continue to live in this region and practice their teachings and lifeways. As many of you are aware, in July, the museum will be opening our newest permanent exhibition, Artists and Inspiration in the Wild. Construction is underway, and you can check our website for project updates and on social media. The walls are up, ceilings going in. It's amazing to see. We really can't wait for everybody to get to see it in person. This monthly speaker program is focused on the topics and the artists that will be featured in the exhibition. It's going to continue as we prepare for the opening, and we hope you continue to join us each month. Tonight, I am delighted to introduce Todd DeGarmo. He's the founding director of the Folklife Center at Crandall Public Library. Todd is a graduate of Colgate University and earned his master's at SUNY Albany. He also did graduate work at the George Washington University. Todd's professional career began in the mid-1980s when he worked at the Smithsonian's Folklife Festival. He's been president of the board of New York Folklore and has been serving as editor of BOCES, the Journal of New York Folklore. Throughout this evening's presentation and discussion, please do feel free to submit any questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And Todd, let's go ahead and get started.
Hey, good evening. Good to see you.
So I wanted to ask if you can just explain a little bit about material culture. It's a term that is thrown about like crazy within the museum community, but I suspect a lot of people in the general public don't really get what material culture is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm coming at it as a folklorist, so I think of it as, anything that's object related to people and communities. It can be as simple as a hatchet or a hat, or it can be landscapes, it can be buildings, it can be foodways, or kind of material culture. It's just one way to all the different things that people make and do, that we as cultural workers can look at and use to study different cultures.
And thinking about your collection and our collection, several objects of which will be featured in the new exhibition, why is it important for museums, for folklife centers, for libraries, for archives to be preserving this? What stories are there to tell, and why is it an important part of the work that you in particular do?
Well, I mean, for me, it's, my background's with folklore, so I'm looking at, traditional cultures, cultures that have some kind of long roots, but maybe more importantly, it's the culture of communities of various small groups. It might be an ethnic group, it might be a church group, it might be your family unit. Academics have their own culture. So I see material culture to use when you're trying to study a group, and it's full of just exciting things, possibilities. There's something about having an object that was created 100 years ago, and then it's layered with all kinds of meaning because it has stories, it has a background, it has a provenance of as it moved forward in time, who the various owners were. Maybe the use changes over time, like a boat that might have been used out on an Adirondack lake. Maybe it's not seaworthy now and it's hanging in somebody's rafters, as a decoration. So yeah, objects are just, they're full of meaning, but as they travel through time without their owners and with new owners, they get layers of meaning, frankly.
I do want to note, you did actually glitch for a moment, and just so everybody's watching, we know there's been weather issues down in Albany. We've had some up here in the Adirondacks, so we have noticed lately that there's been a little bit of Zoom glitch. So so please just be patient with us. Like Todd, I think we lost about 5 seconds.
Oops.
I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about how these objects, the domestic objects, the utilitarian objects, things like a boat, speak to that moment of time or that particular culture and region. And we've got a few things that, that we're featuring. So we've got we've got fishing lures, we've got hunting gear, and maybe we can show a couple of those and maybe just speak to, again, the importance of capturing this moment of time, this community from the outdoor recreationalists.
Sure. We have tonight some research I did and a small video about a fishing fly, just to use as an example. It's a fly that's used a lot, or at least it was created on the Battenkill River down here in Washington County along the Hudson River. It's something that somebody created the pattern, but then then other people, once they know the pattern, the original maker is no longer with us. But now new people can create the fly. It's used, at various times with the weather, because it mimics certain kinds of insects that come out at certain times of day and certain times of the season. You could dig even deeper into, well, what kind of feathers are being used and from what birds and who's supplying those feathers to people to make this fly. Just the name itself, and I think the video talks a little bit about that. Just why is it called the Shushan Postmaster?
So I'll go ahead and pull that video up in just a moment. Let's see.
Yeah. So that's one of those things it's a very layered, it's tiny little thing. It's a fishing fly, and it was created back in the 1950s. But there's a lot of layers of meaning. It's not up.
Have you heard of the Shushan Postmaster? Like all fishing flies, the postmaster is made to lure in a hungry catch. Its hen feathers and yellow floss are arranged in such a way as to mimic the wriggling movements of an insect or bait fish. In the trout fishing community, the postmaster is now well known as its creator, Shushan resident and pioneer of streamer fly patterns, Lou Oatman. Oatman, a retired banker who moved back to the Battenkill from White Plains, New York, dedicated himself to the art of fishing, writing articles on its methodologies, and creating 17 new fly patterns. In his retirement, Oatman became close friends with Al Crandall. Also spending his days fishing in Shushan, Crandall's style was always more unorthodox, guided by experience and gut. So connected to the life of Shushan and its community, Crandall became a muse of Norman Rockwell, an artist whose name has since become synonymous with small-town nostalgia in America's golden age. Before his own retirement, Crandall was Shushan's beloved postmaster from 1935 to 1947. This, as you probably guessed, gave Oatman's fishing fly its name, a loving tribute to his constant companion, the Shushan Postmaster. More than a tool for fishing on the waters of the Battenkill, Oatman's fly encapsulates an image of a bygone era. But most importantly, it is a testament to friendship and to a passion left behind for so many others to enjoy. In Oatman's own words,
"Even the best day must come to an end, and so eventually I mentioned it is time to stop. Waiting there for a reply, I speculate that even if the father of all fishermen were there instead of me and called to Al, that sturdy individualist would hold his ground in midstream for just one more cast."
That's lovely, and I think that it certainly takes us all on a journey. I don't fish, but it makes me really feel a tremendous nostalgia for something that I've never done. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that story, about how you captured it, how you even found it.
Yeah, well, I live in Shushan myself, so it was one of those things that I had heard about it, and I thought, well, what's the story?
Service on the river. I think it happened with.
Sorry.
That's okay. So there was something that you knew living here. People talked about there was a fishing fly that was famous, and was based on this gentleman who was the postmaster. But often would close early so he could go fishing at lunchtime. But you know, back in the 50s, early 60s, I haven't been here that long. But so anyway, looking into it, I found it fascinating that you know, besides Lou Oatman, who's really well known, you know, for certain kinds of streamer flies, he did, you know, 1820 original designs. But then that Norman Rockwell lived up the road in Arlington, you know, which is just over the border from Shushan, and he used to. I mean, there's all kinds of stories around here, you know, great for a folklorist about models, you know, various people who were now in Norman Rockwell's models, and he, you know, he would pay them and they'd go over to his studio, and then he'd use them in various ways. So Al Prindle was one of the he was often in kind of the fat and skinny depictions. There was the other, I can't remember the other fellow's name, but I think he was the barber in town. So he would often pair them together in those illustrations we saw. Yeah, so, you know, again, everybody knows these people. They're people's, you know, uncles and neighbors and things like that. But I mean, I love that it's, you know, from this little fishing fly, that then there's all these layers of stories, you know, going even to Norman Rockwell. And as you saw one of the articles there was an article in Esquire about this fishing fly. And, you know, because you have a lot of Westchester people coming up into the, you know, Arlington, this area. Anyway, you know, there's layers to it. There's a traditional aspect to it, but then there's also a popular culture aspect to it. You know, kind of real life, you know, things don't stop at the border, you know, they float into various parts of our lives. But yeah, kind of a delightful story. So yeah, we did a whole series of videos about the Battenkill, and that was one of the historical ones that we did, that, you know, using old articles and photos. And you know, one of the a lot of the black and white photos was from a photographer here who used to come back up from New York. He grew up here, but then he worked in New York, but he'd come around and take a lot of pictures of local people and such. So with Al Prindle and Lou Logan hanging out together. So, you know, just the treasure trove. As you dig, you find all these various things to help support the story. And that's, you know, that's part of the fun of what I do.
How are you finding that these links? I mean, obviously, you know, we're talking about things that happen in this region, more or less. I mean, presumably this is happening on a national scale. And so what kinds of connections are being established between communities, like especially, you know, looking at these men fishing, and, you know, you think about Minnesota and some of these other regions where it's such a part of culture. And, you know, how are you able to bridge and how do communities make these connections between them? And are they sharing this knowledge? Are they sharing the flies that they're making and some of those?
You know, I think it depends. You know, again, as a folklorist, I'm interested in community and that whole sense of community connection and community communication, you know, kind of sharing the knowledge of, you know, whatever the object is. And in fly fishing, I mean, it's obviously a worldwide kind of thing. It's local, but it's also broader. So, you know, within a fly fishing community, the greater fly fishing community, they would know that fishing fly mostly, you know, if you're a trout fisherman, or the umpteen thousand other styles there are. And then some people, you know, they make these fishing flies, you know, so you find the new maker who makes it and you learn about it. And then if you wanna, as a fly fisherman, sometimes you want to get into it even deeper. And so you start, you know, tying your own flies, and maybe you're tying flies for your, you know, your friends. And there's a lot of patterns that are shared, you know, over time, and people do publications about it. And there's, you know, there's the verbal communication, but there's also the, you know, the written communication that, you know, nowadays people do a lot. You know, if you're part of a particular kind of community, there's often some kind of magazine or some kind of group that you can belong to. And that's the case with, lots of things, lots of things that we think being very local and very traditional and very rooted in a place. But then, because the way the world is today, it travels, people, if they want to know about it, then they'll know it. So in other states, yeah, about the postmaster fly. But if you're not a fisherman, you maybe never heard it before because it's not part of your radar. It doesn't mean anything to you. But then there's the layer of being from Shushan, there's a certain pride that you remember that, this was something that, had to do with your town. So, it's complicated. There's kind of nuances a little bit. And then people like me. I mean, I'm the editor of BOCES, the Journal of New York Folklore, and that's one way we, a lot of us as folklorists will work in very particular communities that have very particular traditions. And then with permission, we'll share that information through things like the journal or going to conferences or sometimes with cultural exchanges, things like that. So it does get around, but it's all over the place. I mean, every community and various layers has their backgrounds and their traditions. It's just more, whether you're willing to look for it, I guess. It's there. It's just sometimes under the radar. I was thinking in terms of fishing, there's I just learned recently, and I've been here in Shushan, 20 years, 30 years. I just recently heard about a fellow who he does ice fishing every year, and he's like a crazy ice fisherman. I think he gets hundreds of fish, and he freezes them. But then at the end of the season, he has a big community feed where he'll cook that all up at a local store and invite everybody to come. So again, having been here all these years, I'm just hearing about it. So I don't know what that says about my connection, even with my own backyard. I'm out looking for these kinds of things all around us and in the region and up in the Adirondacks. And then I was surprised to hear about this kind of cool tradition of sharing his ice fishing trophies, I guess, with the community at the end of the season.
I've heard things like that, and yeah, it's one of those things like there's an incredible giving aspect to it, and a kind of incredible kind of community pride, community spirit that I think a lot of people actually, when they are willing to share their take, it really just, it certainly is a defining aspect of what makes a community.
Mm-hmm.
These are some of the fishing lures that are in the museum's collection, and some of these, again, we've got some that are very unique to this region, as you were mentioning, with the Shushan postmaster, and there's such a charm to them. I think some of my favorites are the Tuttle bugs, which went by a short bit ago, but they look like little. I mean, they're charming, and the artistry to them. There's an artistry, but there's a frivolity as well. As somebody who's not, again, into fishing per se, but they just look. They have little eyeballs and all that, which I guess are attractive to the fish. But for me, it just looks like a toy.
Oh, and I love that you have the card with it. So then there's the clue, right? And like who was in charge of this company, and is this an original design, or did they get it from somebody else? Because fly fishermen are pretty, or the whole idea of fishing flies. I mean, they really keep track of. If it's a design, there's a way to do it and the right kind of materials and all those things, and they tend to be documented within
and they
the
name
fishing.
them all,
Yeah,
which I find fascinating.
Yep.
As an artist names a work, they're naming their work as well.
And isn't that crazy? I mean, it tells you a little bit how old this is. The price was 35 cents. Can you imagine? I mean, it took a little bit of time to make that Tuttlebug.
Well, speaking of community, one thing that of course is coming up here in Saranac Lake, and I was wondering if you might speak to it a little bit, is of course our winter carnival. And the museum also has quite a collection of the buttons that very famously are made by Gary Trudeau. And one of the things that I was thinking about, again, with a lot of your background, is this notion of, you know, where's the difference between something as a souvenir versus as a part of folk life? And I imagine there's really no distinction in your eyes, but I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that and about kind of this notion of a collectible that becomes part of an intellectual collection as well.
Yeah, I think with something like the buttons, it's you know, obviously it's you know, everybody knows the artist, and the whole sense of collecting. I mean, it's a little different than, say, somebody making a balsam pillow, you know, from natural ingredients and everything. So it's more, you know, it's almost like an artist piece from at least a, you know, a famous cartoonist. And then it becomes, you know, kind of manufactured, a lot of them, you know, for people to collect. So for me, it's more, I would, you know, as a folklorist, be interested in the sense of, you know, who's the community that's collecting the button, as opposed to maybe who's making it. I mean, you know, he's famous and well known and, you know, really fun. But I love that he then is, you know, doing several, you know, over the years making these buttons. And I can imagine the pride, you know, in Saranac Lake of, you know, having these buttons and somebody keeping them, and various people, you know, making sure they have a button every year. I mean, for me, that would be the interesting thing, to be able to talk to those people about, well, how do you keep your buttons? You know, do you just put them in a drawer, or do you wear them all at the winter carnival? I mean, almost like oh, I don't know, you know, like Girl Scout badges, you know, there's a certain, you're going to show off all your badges, you know, and that's the kind of part of that tradition of Girl Scouts. So with the buttons, you know, you almost wonder, well, you know, how are people using these buttons? Are they, you know, are they showing them off, or, you know, do you just get one and that's it? Or is there a whole network of people that are, you know, really into it and, you know, kind of show them off to everybody every year, and almost, you know, as a sense of pride. Look, I've been here since the beginning. You know, I have all the buttons. So that would be interesting to find those people and interview them, what their motivation is.
So it's the story more than the object that becomes, you know, the.
Yeah. And I think how it's created sometimes. I mean, for me, and I think my colleagues, a lot of it is the handmade nature of it rather than the mass produced. I mean, even though, I mean, that's not even true in a way, because I'm thinking I study like Abenaki baskets and beadwork. At the, you know, down in Saratoga Springs, there was an Indian encampment in the 19th century, and there's also some of it going on in Lake George. And, you know, those handmade baskets and beadworks and little canoes, they were mass produced. I mean, but they were all done by hand. So, you know, I don't think it's an age thing. I think it's more that they're handmade. Or like the balsam pillows at the Big Moose Community Chapel. They make hundreds of balsam pillows when they do that in the summer, and then resell them to raise money for their church. But the balsam pillow has a long history in the Adirondacks as a souvenir, and often was, you know, handmade, though there were early manufacturers, family-run manufacturers, that actually, you know, made the pillows too, and created a network of people to stuff them and sell them at their resorts and at their little mom and pop camps and stuff. And that was early on. I mean, that was in the teens and early 1920s. The Nortons over in, they had this Standard Supply Company. So that's a souvenir, but you know, it has a maybe a longer history. Maybe that's part of it. Though folk life shouldn't have to have a long history either, you know, but it should be deeply rooted into a community. So, you know, the Saranac Lake buttons, in the sense that they're part of a community, and then how the community feels about them, that's what would be my take as a folklorist, to try to figure out what that's about. Same with the balsam pillows. I mean, they're people know those nationally, internationally, because they're so many were made, and it was kind of the scented souvenir you could take home with you. That was very portable, and for me, just very Adirondack.
I think you have a video about those as
Yeah,
well.
I was
right?
going to say, I think we have a standard supply company video.
Yeah, let me go ahead and I'm going to pull that up in just a second.
We could look at that.
1 second.
So this is that company that we was just talking about, a family-run company that we did a little video about.
Okay.
These videos too, just to say, they're all on our YouTube site.
Company in Otter Lake was an Adirondack family business that sold novelties, gifts, and souvenirs. Opened in 1914 by John A. Norton, it was also one of the major suppliers of Adirondack balsam pillows from the 1920s to the 1950s. Balsam pillows boast a smell that entices tourists and locals alike. The woodsy scent, sharp and earthy, is characteristic of the Adirondacks and sparks memories of time spent there among the trees. But it's not only what's inside the pillows that makes them special. A much-loved souvenir of the region that dates back over 100 years, the balsam pillow covers, design, and assembly are a story all their own. Initially, Standard Supply Company made their own silk-screened pillow covers. John A.'s daughter, Marlene, created hundreds of designs. She drew the pictures and cut out a series of stencils used to make the screens for multicolored covers, one screen for each color in the final print. Father and son, John A. and John B., made the pillow covers in a shop behind their house. The cloth was bought 20 rolls at a time in New York City, cut into lengths and blocks, and silk screened by hand in layers of colors. This work was done all winter, all day long in the back shop kept warm with oil heat. After being left to dry overnight, the blocks were sent to the house, where Marlene sewed them into pillow covers using an overlocking sewing machine with 3 needles and a set of knives. The balsam used to fill the covers was gathered in branches by local people hired by the Nortons. John B. hauled the branches back, cut them up, and filled 50-pound bags using an elaborate system of pulleys, shafts, and flat belts run by a 1-cylinder gasoline engine in the shop. Over a ton of balsam was cut every week to be used in the pillows or simply to be sold by weight. The 50-pound bags of cut balsam, empty pillow covers, and filled pillows were sold throughout the Adirondack North Country. John A. Norton would travel to various hotels and shops to sell the balsam pillow souvenirs, including the mailers, as remembered by Ida Ainsworth Winter.
And you also got the little tiny balsam pillows that were what, 2 by 3 or so, with a string like, and then it would be a card and you could mail it. You just put a stamp on it, and one day probably you sent a stamp and grab it in the mail, and it would go.
Balsam pillows, mailers, and souvenirs, like those made and sold by the Standard Supply Company in Otter Lake, are part of a traditional culture all of its own. Like Ida Winter and her recollections of the mailers, generations of locals and visitors are familiar with balsam pillows, and given the chance, have endless stories to share that evoke the Adirondacks' tourist culture.
I can smell it from here. It seems like.
Yeah.
So we do have a few questions, and I wanted to go ahead and pull up some. Can you speak to what the breadth and scope of folklore is? Does it include music, dance, or is it only objects? All objects or just tools?
Yeah, no, I like the word folklife better because it's really all encompassing. It's music, it's the way we worship, it's our food customs, it's everything we do. Yet it has to, for me, it has to be there has to be that community connection. There's something that we're doing in groups where we have control over it and we're doing it, and it's not kind of imposed upon us from, some mass-produced Walmart kind of situation. It's things that we do. So it doesn't have to be, old tools or old things. It's just what we do today. But that maybe is a little under the radar. Maybe it's something we don't share with everybody, but we do in the group that we belong to. It's something that's important, to us. It's such a big breadth of, there's so much included with it. It's just it's that rootedness. It's that we do it this way because we've always done it. And, usually if you talk to somebody about it and bring attention to it, they're like, why are you interested in that? That's just the way we do it. It's that kind of stuff. It's not always like, I'm thinking like quilting, for example. Quilting for me as a folk tradition is a particular group doing a particular kind of quilting. For a long time, down in the South, there's a group called G's Bend, and they got very famous for the kinds of African-American strip quilting they were doing, and gorgeous quilts, but very particular to their kind of quilting. That was their thing. There's a lot of quilting around that's a little bit high end. I mean, from even 100 years ago, it was something you did, hand quilting because you had the free time to do it. Frankly, you were an upper middle class person who you were putting together, your dowry chest, or showing that you had precise needlework, kinds of things that you did. And then, that within that tradition, that's, that. But I studied, or I worked with women in Adirondacks when I first came back to the area, who were making what they called tide quilts. They, and I know, talking with colleagues or talking to people at that time, like 30 years ago, they're saying, well, why are you calling them tide quilts? They should be comforters. I said, well, no, because the group I'm working with, they call them tide quilts. And, as a folklorist, I want to learn from the people that have the tradition. I want to hear what their rules are, why they think it's beautiful, why do they do it the way they do it. And what I was told at the time was, we do tide quilts. We do, we can pull them up quickly because they're tied. We don't have time as farm women and, wives of lumbermen to, sit around in the parlor and hand stitch these. We're going to make them for bed covers. We're going to have the 3 layers. We're going to have a backing, a middle, and a top. And we're going to use scraps. We're going to use the leftover pieces that we have from other sewing projects, because we can't afford to go out and get bolts of cloth to make a quilt. We're going to, make it up, use it up and make it do. We're going to use these pieces and create something beautiful. And what I was told by some of the makers at that time was, the more scraps and the more old projects you have of, leftover cloth, the more beautiful your quilt can be, because you have all these colors and all these patterns and all these things you can put together in some kind of pleasing form. So I found with their quilts, they especially the tide quilts, very colorful, lots of different, materials in them. And often they'd put wool in the center or a wool blanket to keep them warm. And they said, when we tie them, we can make them thicker. And boy, that's important in the cold Adirondack winters at the time, when they learned from their mothers and grandmothers. And I had colleagues at the time going, well, they're not hand sewing these, what's that about? Why not? And it was like, well, again, out of practicality, no, they're using sewing machines. And when I questioned about that, they said, well, our grandmothers used sewing machines, singer, sewer, they had sewing machines in the, 1900. Why wouldn't they use them to be practical and making bedclothes, for the family and for neighbors? And so I worked with this group. They were the Johnsburg United Methodist Women. And they were a really fun group, a big group at the time. And they used to, besides learning to make these quilts for their families, they would do it as a fundraiser in their church. And so they'd all get together in quilting bees and create all kinds of gorgeous quilts that then they'd sell at a rummage sale or a sale at the church to help pay for the expenses of their church. So all those layers are, fascinating to me. Very different than somewhere else where they're making quilts, but, very connected to quilting, and very much people would recognize different aspects of it. But it was very telling for the community that I was working with in that Johnsburg, North Creek, North River area.
And we've got a video of that as well.
Yes, that's true.
Tied quilts have a long history in the Adirondack North Country. Pieces of art and symbolic representatives of hours of work, years of tradition, and the generations of women who make them. Tied quilts are made of lots of little scrap pieces of material, coming together into a colorful whole. In Warren County, New York, where the Hudson River rises into the Adirondack foothills, the Johnsburg United Methodist Women use the quilts as bed covers, gifts to neighbors in need, and to sell at craft sales at locally affordable prices. They raise money to support their local church, where a Ladies' Aid Society stained glass window sits proudly in view for all visitors to see. Like the quilts themselves, the group symbolizes generations of hard work and support of the small country congregation. Quilts are commonly 3 layers. The backing is the simple underside, the batting, a warm interlining, and the top, a decorative side. In the tying process, spaced threads are passed through the layers of the quilts and tied into knots. Tying is quicker than quilting and allows a thicker batting to be used for a warmer cover. Tied quilts are often not overly structured in design, and a tradition of waste not, want not has influenced the choice of materials used. Scraps are commonly salvaged from family sewing projects. Other materials have included leftover scraps from making shirt tails at a local factory, cloth grain bags that came in an assortment of prints and patterns, and even unworn portions of wool jackets and pants. Such scrap pieces are preferred by many of the area's longtime tied quilters. They like the effect of combining materials of many different colors and patterns, and say that the more little pieces you have, the better the variety, and the faster the top comes together. Though some learned within the quilting groups, many area women learned to make tied quilts from older relatives. I started in while I was a teenager, or maybe a little bit younger, working on these quilts at night with my mother. We pieced them by hand. These quilts have been used and enjoyed, not tucked away. Tops made a generation or more ago are given backing and batting and are tied by the new generation. In some, colors are faded and materials are worn from constant use. Sometimes patches are added where the material has worn clear through. These are quilts used and loved by the present owners to be passed on with pride to the new.
So there's something that's really fascinating about that, and the fact that, you know, we can all go to Target or on Amazon and we can buy a comforter, we can buy a quilt, we can buy something. But this piece and what you were saying earlier, where people really have this connection between their family. I learned it from my mother. I learned it from my grandmother. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that and that sense of that importance that people are making choices in how, in carrying on these traditions, that from a practical perspective, there are alternatives today. So what's going on with the sense of commitment to these traditions?
Well, sure. And these videos we've been looking at, some of them are based on field work, you know, from 20, 30 years ago. So I don't think the Johnsburg women are active anymore in terms of, I'm not positive about that, but I know a lot of the women I knew, you know, they've passed on. But, you know, I think other traditions take their place. But at that time, I mean, you couldn't go to Walmart. You couldn't, you know, you didn't have that option. So that's why you were doing it. So I think there's maybe newer traditions around that people do. And, you know, sometimes the tradition changes. I was thinking, you know, that we have another video about, you know, baskets and pack baskets. And I know years ago, you know, it was cheap to buy a pack basket. You could, or baskets from, you know, a Native American making, you know, a potato basket or an apple basket. You know, they'd sell them for, you know, several, you know, for, you know, a dozen for $5 or something. I know up and down the Hudson, you know, down in Hudson, there were Taconic baskets that they'd sell down for the apple orchards. Here in the Adirondacks, I know you could get a pack basket pretty inexpensively. You know, because it was something nobody else was doing, and it was a way to make, you know, money. But you had all the raw materials at your fingertips, and you had your, you know, your tools. So it was a way to, you know, to supplement your income and you know, and to keep the tradition going for sure. I mean, nowadays, I think pack basket, especially made the old-fashioned way, you know, there's you know, pounding out a black ash log and then you know, shaping and then, you know, creating basket. Thank goodness, frankly, that there's some value now to something like that. That there has been a revival, you know, from years ago about respecting handcraft and, you know, at least going in the direction of paying more for what it's worth. So, you know, you're not going to get a pack basket for $5. You know, you're going to spend, you know, probably a couple hundred. You can even get one. You know, I know when I go and you know, buy you know, work baskets for my garden. I was thinking a few years ago I got one at the Bruchak's Saratoga Indian Native American Festival, and I got something from an older maker down from Maine, and I just love that basket. It has a strong handle. I remember at the time he said, you can turn it on its side and sit on it and it's not going to break. You know, this is a work basket. I don't want you to hang it on the wall. I want you to use it. And I think sometimes some of the old crafts, you know, it becomes kind of something you hang on the wall. So I love when you find, you know, that somebody's making some money at it, but also that it's utilitarian, is, you know, and you can use it. And then, you know, I kind of have a tradition that I have this basket that I've been using for 20 years in my garden. And, you know, my kids know that. And, you know, you hope you pass it on to them. But, you know, traditions change all the time. You know, they modify and morph as they need to.
Well, let's take a look at the video that you've got on pack baskets.
Yeah, so that one's it's my my old friend Jack Ledley Sr. from Speculator, and it's my you know, my ode to him. He passed on a little while ago.
You know, we have one of his baskets in our collection.
I know. That's why I picked this.
And the slight gap here, there's the center. I'm going to start writing. Called an Adirondack legend, Jack Ledley was a skilled woodsman, a hunter and a trapper. He was an artist, a writer, a snowshoe and ski instructor. He flew a plane, giving me my first aerial view of the Adirondack Park. He'd say it was handy for a quick trip to Maine to catch up with family over a lobster dinner, and then laugh heartily as we touched back down. Jack breathed new life into an old discarded pack basket that hung in the garage of my childhood. Some years after moving out of that home, I learned that Jack had carried a pack basket more than 1,000 miles on snowshoes since the 1940s while running his trap lines. He began to make his own when quality baskets were getting hard to find. Jack made his Adirondack pack baskets the old-fashioned way. He started by cutting black ash trees in the spring when the bark peeled off easily. He soaked and pounded every square inch of the log so the annual growth rings would loosen and separate. He pulled the splints off the full length of the log and smoothed and cut them into uniform strips, creating the raw material used to weave the basket. Jack's love of the Adirondacks came early in life. In the 1930s, his family drove up from Staten Island to spend summers in a rented cabin on Lake Pleasant in Speculator. After serving in World War II, Jack returned to the mountains permanently, marrying his wife Joan and joining a family with roots tracing back to 1794. Today, the Ledley family compound stretches 115 acres. Here, Jack built the bark shanty modeled off a small cabin built by his great-grandfather-in-law in the 1890s. Dubbed Camp Balsam, he dedicated the shanty to the memory of those Adirondack pioneers who came here before us. His 8 by 10-foot shanty was framed with poles covered with sheets of peeled bark. The front door faced south to catch the winter sun, and a window covered with deer rawhide diffused a warm amber light inside. There were 2 pole beds filled with fresh balsam and an open fire pit. The smoke inside escaped through a small wooden tower on the roof. Soon it became a Hamilton County destination. Jack welcomed visitors to his workshop and demonstrated his craft at folk festivals and workshops throughout the region. He shared his knowledge and time wholeheartedly, but came to prefer staying on his own property in the woods, allowing folks to come to him. My workshop is so complete for my production, I do not leave it much. July and August, there are visitors here every day. I like to be here as people interested in my work are an added benefit to meet. I think of those joyous afternoons with Jack in his workshop, and my mind returns to that old pack basket of my childhood. According to family stories, my stepfather was carried in it by his own stepfather across a frozen Saranac Lake. Jack, too, carried his own young son in a pack basket of his making while hiking the woods near their home. A mini pack basket made by Jack was gifted to my family at the birth of my first son and remains at our home today.
People ask me sometimes, what do you like to do best? And, I like about everything I'm doing. I make pack baskets and rustic furniture, maple tree snowshoes. But I think pack baskets is something everyone has a little bit of an art form to it. No two exactly alike. And when I start a basket, now I'm in mind what I want to do, what I want it to come out, what I want it to be. You get to that.
was just lovely. And again, what really just, excuse me, strikes. What strikes me is, again, the story behind the object. And I feel like that's, as we've been talking this evening and thinking about the works that we'll be putting up in just a few months, how important that is, that, it's wonderful to look at a work of art, to look at a pack basket, to look at a quilt. But I think these stories that you have shared and that you have conserved, they bring a depth to this that, it's hard. And it also makes me wonder about all the stories that have been forgotten. We have a lot of objects, of course, in our collection that we don't know the history. We don't know who the maker was. We don't know the context. And I'm wondering, as a study, as a student of folklore and folk life, how do you get your head around all that knowledge about these wonderful objects that's been lost?
I think some of it is
You have to start drinking more.
you may not know. Oops. You may not know the the backstory, specific backstory to different objects, but I mean, as curators and other art historians and other cultural workers know, because some of the objects are traditional objects, you can tell a kind of a greater story. I mean, those pack baskets that you have that you're looking at to maybe put in the exhibit, you can tell by the way they're made and shape and things like that to kind of give a sense of, gee, what's their age? Gee, what community maybe do they come from? Is it in an Abenaki style? Is it in a Mohawk style? Could it be somebody else? Are there markings on it that maybe will give us clues? Sometimes I think there's the community story, even if you don't know, for me, that helps a lot, because we'll find things for our folk art collection. We have a sizable folk art collection at Crandall Public Library, part of the Folklife Center. And, I've collected it since, the 30 years I've been there, to support programs mostly, and, to use in exhibits. It's kind of an unlikely place to have an object collection. But sometimes we find things where we don't know who made them. We have things like fungus art that we've discovered at yard sales, and, they're particular ones I'm thinking of. There's images of a prison down south of Glens Falls that it's a picture of, and I think there's a signature on one of those. So then you kind of get a sense of, oh, was this a prisoner? Was this a guard? What do we know about this prison? So sometimes there's a little side story that helps bring it to life, or at least you get into the imagination of it. Trying to figure out, well, who was the maker, and what can we tell about it? But things like fishing flies, I mean, those, you can kind of dig around and see if you can find anything. Sometimes it's just, for me, it's just sad. It's like the object is beautiful. There's a maker behind it, and it's a secret. It's just, it's lost. But thank goodness you have the object, and what can you tell about the object? What's gonna float your boat about the object? What's gorgeous about it? How is it made? Was it, is there any kind of evidence of how it was used? I mean, all those things are important too. But I love that, we can, at least in the work I'm in, because I'm collecting mostly from living practitioners. I love that we can collect, and have files and have photographs and have things, where we're watching the process, or, we're creating something to put out on YouTube so people know more about it. That's the special part for me. And I love working with living artists who, work in a tradition. So that's exciting. That's such a a gift to be able to do this for 30 years at Crandall. I mean, we're celebrating 30 years of me as the founding director of the Folklife Center at Crandall Public Library. And that being said, somebody was asking about, well, you know, what's folklife, what's folk art? We're going to have a festival out in City Park in Glens Falls on July 25th. It's going to be an all-day festival, and we're going to share music and food demonstrations and craft demonstrations and dance and storytelling and some activities. So it will be a free festival down in the park. And, you know, again, kind of a taste. I mean, we're working with traditional arts in upstate New York. Tawny is going to be a partner, and New York Folklore out of Schenectady is going to be a partner. So it should be a wonderful day and kind of an opportunity to meet artists face to face and, you know, watch them do what they do. It's been a privilege for me. I mean, by that poem to Jack, you know, it was an appreciative kind of moment for me to go, oh, you know, it's hard for me sometimes to share those kinds of things, but this man was really important in my development of working in the Adirondacks. And, you know, to want to show an appreciation for somebody that marvelous, frankly, I feel very privileged.
Well, thank you very much. Speaking of privilege, it has been an absolute delight to have you here. I'm so intrigued about the July 25th event, and I'm glad that you made note of it. I do want to let everybody know some of the activities and events that we've got coming up at the Adirondack Experience. Our next program in this series will be February 27th. It will feature 3 artists who have all fashioned an Adirondack chair, but who typically work in very different media. We'll have furniture maker Jonathan Sweet, photographer Barry Lobdell, and painter Tim Fortune. In February, we'll also be bringing back our popular Dax dishes, so we want to whet your appetites with that. That's a series with the Albany Public Library, and information on the upcoming programs and registration is coming up in the chat. If you are in the Adirondack region and are looking for something to do before July 25th, or before our July 1st opening, we've got Taps and Trivia, which is a new program that we're doing. We're doing takeovers at different breweries throughout the Adirondacks, and we'll be at Common Roots, actually down in Todd's neighborhood in South Glens Falls on February 6th, and then at Hex and Hop in Bloomingdale up here in the Adirondacks on February 15th. And if you're looking for something a little bit quieter, we've also introducing forest bathing and sensory walks and winter walks. Information on these and some of our member events will be coming up on the chat and on our website as well. And that being said, this program has been recorded. It will be available on our website later this week. Todd, I thank you so very much. This has been an absolute wonderfully fascinating and kind of joyous just walk down the lens of history and thinking about what all these incredible makers have brought to our region, to the nation, and its connection to our life today. So thank you so much. And congratulations on your 30th anniversary. That's wonderful.
No, this is lovely. Thanks so much.
Thank you.